Now, this is once again going to be a video where I'll be oh so curious to hear or read what you all have to say on the topic afterwards. And coincidentally enough, this story ties directly into the poll I did last week for the show Star Wars Resistance, where I asked all of you how you felt about it. And as you can see, 77% of the 30,000 people who have voted in the poll at this point said that they'd never seen the show and didn't want to. And yes, I will certainly acknowledge that I don't have the most pro-Disney Star Wars audience here on this channel, so that number might be higher than what you might see from another Star Wars channel should they conduct a very similar poll. Not that a channel that only ever talks positively about Star Wars would be a more accurate representation of the whole fanbase, only that both would be skewed to some degree, and between the two polls you'd likely find the most accurate results. That said though, when comparing this poll to the one I did for Rebels the previous week, which is of course yet another animated Star Wars series from the Disney era, we'll see that only 25% of people had no interest in watching that show, which is a rather reasonable or fair number when you consider a lot of people just aren't that interested or would watch the animated shows in the first place, and that of those who had seen it, most gave it an average or better score. In other words here, when we consider it's virtually the same people voting in both polls, well, from the looks of things, they were rather fair towards Rebels, so I don't know that we can say or blame the poor results for Resistance on just some kind of irrational hate for Disney Star Wars when, again, they were relatively fair to something else Disney Star Wars. Rather, these are just fans who genuinely had no interest in Resistance for any number of reasons that go beyond just being angry Disney haters who would downvote anything from them. And in that video, I surmised that it was likely this apathy towards the show that killed it, and why it's getting cancelled after only 2 seasons. Because, as you may remember, when the trailer for that second season of the show dropped a few months ago now, it was announced at the same time that it would also be the final season of the show, which certainly surprised some people, but didn't exactly surprise me. In fact, a few days before that announcement, I said in a video that I wouldn't be surprised at all if the show gets cancelled in the very near future, because we had just learned at San Diego Comic-Con that Hasbro had no future plans to release any more action figures or other toys associated with the show Star Wars Resistance. And, well, one of the reasons kids' shows exist in the first place, the primary one you could say, is to of course sell toys. Hell, one of the big things with any Star Wars movie or show, whether they be aimed at kids or not, is all the money to be made from merchandising. So if that money isn't being brought in, don't expect a show to last very long. And while the fact that the toys clearly weren't selling is more evidence to lend credibility to apathy being the killer of Resistance, that even the kids it was clearly aimed at weren't watching it. However, recently we've learned from the show's creators over at Lucasfilm that Resistance didn't actually get cancelled or scrapped, but that they claim it was the plan all along for the show to last just 2 seasons, that this was only ever meant to be a show that leads directly into the rise of Skywalker, not anything more than that. That initially the creators even sat down and planned the whole thing out with the Lucasfilm story group in order to just be a bridge between the movies, and that the creators were even hoping it didn't last any longer because they wanted it to be a complete story that didn't go on for too long and wear out its welcome. Yet in the same interview, they talk about how they hope to see these characters used again in other media. And look, though I always do try to be fair, and will even give Lucasfilm and or Disney the benefit of the doubt at times, in this case, I'm not buying it and I call total BS here. I can't believe that it was always the plan from the very start for this show to last just 2 seasons. That the initial plan wasn't for it to, hopefully, be a huge smash success that ran multiple years and sold a hell of a lot of toys along the way. Not to mention perhaps got kids interested in the newly opened Galaxy's Edge at both Disney World and Disneyland, since the show is set in the same time period as the park is, and there's a really, really good chance I'd say that the show will go to, or would have gone to, Batuu at some point, the planet Galaxy's Edge is based off of. And if it really was the plan from day one to just be a type of bridge between the movies and to lead directly into Episode 9, why wasn't it marketed that way from the very start? Why in that first awful trailer that had a horrendous upvote to downvote ratio did it look so goofy and childish if you had such big plans and ambitions for it? Why didn't they go out of their way to say that this was going to be a big part of the path to Episode 9, that it was going to be a 2-season series that led right into the film? And do keep in mind, Season 1 premiered after The Last Jedi was released, so they could have picked up right after the events of that movie and made it even more relevant and more focused, and drew more interest from people all around. Instead, the show was set pre The Force Awakens by a few months, and they were trying to sell it as this weird cross between racing and spying, not as anything that would tie directly into the movies and be very relevant and lead into the last film in the saga. And sure, behind the scenes they said there would be connections between it and the sequel trilogy, but they certainly never said it would be only 2 seasons, or gave the impression that it would be. And again, why wouldn't the first trailer sell the show that way, as being a lead up to episode 9? Your average fan is likely only going to watch the trailer, be turned off by it, and never watch the show, and never bother to read up on what the creators are saying behind the scenes to know that yes, this show in some way will be relevant to the sequel trilogy. They lost a huge chunk of their potential audience with that first trailer, yet claim they knew from the very start what the show was or would be, and yet they didn't sell it that way to the fans. Give me a break. Then there's the fact that the show painfully meanders its way through most of Season 1. It's this really slow burn in an attempt to build characters for the long haul, I'd imagine, that leads to a somewhat decent season finale that overlaps with the events of The Force Awakens, where our main character Kaz, who's from the Hosnian system, witnesses the destruction of his homeworld. But if this was really meant to be a focused 2-season story, you likely would have had that be your mid-season finale, not what came at the end of, again, a very slow-paced first season, not when you only have 2 seasons in total to work with. Though from the sound of it, I don't think we'll be getting a full second season. Season 1 was 22 episodes long, but don't be surprised if Season 2 is half that long, and if it comes to an end shortly before, maybe even the week before, The Rise of Skywalker is released in theaters. I could be wrong about that. As far as I know, they haven't announced how many episodes long this season is, but if that is the case, it'll seem more likely that after the failure of Season 1, the show soon got cancelled and they didn't get to complete a full 22 episode second season. And do keep in mind that a single season of these animated shows takes a very long time to produce. Usually they're even working a season or 2 ahead. So by the time Season 1 actually aired, they were likely long since hard at work on Season 2. And then when the show wasn't well received, there's every chance they pulled the plug and left them with a partially completed second season. Now if that's the case, perhaps they were allowed to make a handful of final episodes that wrapped up the show and let it tie directly into episode 9. Keeping all that in mind, it will be very, very interesting to see how long this second season is and how it flows. Because if, like with the first season, it's going along at a relatively slow pace at the start before very suddenly ramping up with the last few episodes, we'll know that most likely it did get cancelled mid-production, but that they were allowed to create a few final episodes to, in a sense, salvage the series and to connect it to the Rise of Skywalker in order to drum up interest for both the series and the movie, and also to allow them to play it off like this had been the plan all along. Another rather interesting thing to note here is that recently the first season of Resistance was released on DVD, but not Blu-ray. And yes, all the seasons of Clone Wars, even back in the day when Blu-ray was relatively new, and all seasons of Rebels got released on Blu-ray. But Season 1 of Resistance only got a DVD release, and I see this as even more evidence that they thought this show was, I'm sorry to say, a failure and didn't have confidence that anyone would buy it on Blu-ray. Not that the plan all along here was to have this be a very short 2-season show that tied directly into the movies. And let's just be brutally honest here. Lucasfilm didn't dump all that money into a brand new show, and it's not cheap to just create one of these shows, only to have it last, at most, 2 full seasons. I honestly can't believe they're even trying to claim this right now. That they can't just come out and say, we get that this show didn't resonate with, well, anyone, young or old, and we're canceling it. And since reading about all this, I keep hearing Dooku's line to Anakin from Revenge of the Sith in my head about twice the pride and double the fall. Because, come on, Lucasfilm and Disney, we know that if the show had done really well, it wouldn't be ending right now. We know if it was selling toys and getting kids interested in Galaxy's Edge, it'd keep going. We know that the original plan for the sequel trilogy era wasn't to come and go quietly in the night like it seems to be, which is why Galaxy's Edge was based off it in the first place, and why shows like Resistance were made. You had big, long-term plans for this trilogy and this time period that aren't panning out. We know you wanted kids to fall in love with this era of Star Wars, that you wanted the show to be a tie-in to your theme park, and to make a boatload of money off of all of it for years to come, but it isn't happening, and it's not happening with the sequel trilogy in general. So let's just call Resistance what it is, a mistake. Yes, some fans like it, and that's certainly fine, but by and large, very few people were intrigued by that initial trailer, and many that did give it a shot and watched it weren't impressed with what they saw. And look, every time I talk about this show, I inevitably have people who say in the comments, it's a kid's show, like that should be the beginning and end of any kind of discussion we can have about it. As if the standards for kids shows should be much lower than they should be for adults, as if kids can't understand when something is good or bad. Yet even if the show was aimed squarely at kids, which many claim and does seem to be the case, they don't like it either. If they did, even if it had been the original plan to last just 2 seasons, they would have changed their minds at Disney and Lucasfilm if it was doing really well and continued it on. You know this to be true. There's no way if season 1 had been a massive success and if toys were flying off the shelves right now that they would have brought this show to an end. And I see no way that that was the original plan to begin with. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think. Was it the plan all along for Resistance to be just 2 seasons, or are they flat out lying about it? And what do you think the future of this time period, the sequel time period, looks like after the rise of Skywalker? Will we get more shows, comics, and books set during this time period, or will they pretty much let it fade away quietly in the night and focus all their attention on different new time periods? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.